Ciellikle. Ciel is the French word for heaven. Then it continues into a word that could make leak out of. So they're getting leaks of stuff from heaven. Ciellikle. They are a group of cats that have a special role to play on the farm. Here, once they mature and reach a quantity equal to about 100. 100 can be used to replace 1 with a lowercase I, which makes it the Lou. So it's about the Lou at the Sioux. Their job involves doing something. Cats are the most difficult animal to herd. As a matter of fact, the leader of the U.S. Senate once compared them to senators. They are of their own mind. In this case, the position of the Big Dipper suggests that they're talking about late July, beginning of August, but probably later July. The Big Dipper orbits around the pole, and as it orbits, it also turns. What you see when you look up at the sky can also give you the time of the year, depending on whether it's showing itself emptying or it's turned around upside down. It's the position of receiving. This particular position shown in the picture would suggest a time between July and September. More than likely the end of July or thereabouts. The cats are going to be in the number of approximately 100 who are destined to travel to the fifth dimension. The fifth dimension has the possibility of giving Earthlings a new start after having screwed up completely beyond repair the fourth dimension universe. Fourth dimensional universe because each preceding universe, of which there are 26, had one dimension added to it at every universe along the way. So we start in the first universe of 1 dimension, second universe in 2 dimension, third universe in 3 dimension, and the one we're living in now, with the addition of time, a 4th dimension. The next universe will be occupied by the disentanglement of the helix of the dead to date, which approximately is 7 billion people lived and died. Another 7 billion people now walking on Earth, give or take a few million. The cats, with a group of people leaving the farm, will basically herd humans into the 5th dimension. So these cats will join humans who have lived and died and cats who were born and died on the farm, led by these 100 living cats on the day it happens. That, of course, will be the next journey as the world as we know it is brought to an end. The world as we know it is the end of product of bureaucratic control. Bureaucrats took power in 1789 and decapitated their leaders. I'm sure you've noticed there's been a lot of talk of decapitation as something that is occurring fairly often these days. Thinking not in terms of the method used by the French in 1789, but manually by people who appear on a video showing them decapitating people in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, that general area known as Persia at one time. The bureaucrats are products of genetic modification. Most of that genetic modification in the last 3,000 years has occurred in the Balkans on Syria by using the DNA of known individuals, mix and matching that DNA, and replacing the contents of a female egg with a new recipe. The genetic engineers have been able to manufacture gene pools that will be useful to their end times plan for a period of time until their shelf life usefulness is expired. If you think about it in terms of the education we got in school, think of Adam and Eve beginning the manufacturing of a gene pool. Cain being manufactured as a builder, Abel being manufactured as someone who will take refuge, hide, and operate from a position of unknown. As the gene pools are used, a tweaking process exists with the offspring, so that the offspring of the original will improve on the knowledge and ability of their own offspring, which may or may not be direct offspring, because what they work on is 4 generations. So it could be your great-grandmother having an effect on who you are today, as much as it could be your grandmother or your mother having the desired effect. But in the last 3,000 years, they needed at least 12 different gene pools, and they called them tribes. Each one was assigned a different task based on the genetic material that was used from a person who had lived and died. At one stage of the game, it was basically monarchs who were being made because they would then have control over a large group of people, usually about 2,000. And could add to the genetic engineering a certain amount of social and political engineering. Every time they tweak the recipe, they slightly improve upon the quality of the task at hand for each gene pool. They tweak it not knowing exactly what is the best outcome and usually go past the point of what they were looking for. At that point, they have to stop the tweaking designed to improve and start tweaking in the context of returning back towards the center point where they began, hoping to find the best place possible. Unfortunately, that leads to them going past the point that they consider best and have to again reverse the process. If you look at the context that Noah's Ark is a story written in the year 2900 BC, therefore 4900 years ago, what it demonstrates is that one stage of the game, having realized that they had gone too far in returning, and where they had turned back from was more in line with what they had wanted. They now had a gene pool of humans they had created over approximately 500 to 600 years that they had no use for. Therefore, their remedy was a flood. Kill the ones you made because you don't have time to go through the entire process again and start with a few that are in line with what you used to have and what you want next. Then start making them back again to take the gene pool back in that direction. Therefore, we learn about a modus operandi. War, pestilence, famine, disease, floods, hurricanes, many means by which one can kill people, including revolution. Getting back to what they wanted, eventually repeating the process a number of times. In 1789, it was decided by the bureaucracy that worked for monarchs to kill them unless they agreed to a new system called democracy. That system meant that bureaucrats, not monarchs, would run the world. Bureaucrats have now in this century outlived their purpose. Bureaucracies begin at a country's border. Includes after the border guards, immigration, and after immigration, police and criminals. Those are the main players in a bureaucracy. Border guards, immigration, including refugees and police. Their work is internal within the boundaries of the country in which they operate. Of course, recently we've been told by the border guards that they control Canada. That's what they say, and what they do does require anyone else's permission. That they are the bureaucrats with a responsibility equal to a monarch. Now, what seems to be happening is they themselves have outlived their usefulness and are to be replaced with new border guards, new immigration people, new income tax people, new police, because it's the income tax that pays and controls all of these groups. Because they have presented themselves to be above and beyond the rule of law, and especially beyond the control of their own controllers. So the process began about 5 years ago in Syria, where the president set up artillery, started shooting big cannons into municipalities in Syria, who were responsible for making the existing bureaucrats line. Diminishing in great numbers the bureaucrats that now control day-to-day activity. In any event, I was saying that in Syria, the president of the country turned his guns upon the known gene pools made by genetic engineers for the purpose of making bureaucrats, and has so far killed about 400,000 of these people. At the same time, in other places, made sure that less people of a different gene pool were simply scared into running away, and that the number is approximately 14 million people to date, who are living in camps in Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan especially. They are being spoken to by the UN, who then determine which gene pool they're from, when they should migrate to different countries, and in what numbers. For example, Canada has agreed to take in 25,000 refugees, sponsored by the government, by the end of February. Their purpose here is to provide offspring who will be Canadian-born, replace the existing gene pools employed as border security, immigration, refugee, police, local, and national. These children, known as sleeper cells, will grow into the replacement for the gene pool they want replaced within the next 25 years. Many of them will be used to replace great numbers of current bureaucrats whose position interferes with future plans. They are known as sleeper cells. They grow up as Canadians and replace people on the border. The children of immigrants do that. A cataclysmic event activity is designed to take out a large number of these people that are border guards, especially, and policemen. The immigrants can be used to replace those people in the society already here who will take over those positions. The cataclysmic event planned for North America is, of course, known as the Lou at the Sioux. And what it does is it begins with a leak that is enhanced into a flood that then grows into an inland tsunami, liquefies much of the area around the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence River, states such as Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, Canada, Toronto, Hamilton, London, Sarnia, a whole bunch of places on the Bruce Peninsula, into the St. Lawrence Seaway. creating a situation where the Canadian shield will respond by rising in a physics concept called isostasy. I notified by the cell recently that there was something going on, that the existing cats on the property have formed what we call a catmobile, positioning to receive information. The suggestion a leak in the Big Dipper would occur as a sign of a leak in the Lou at the Sioux project. Without giving a specific date or year for that matter, they showed the Big Dipper in a turnaround position, which can be attributed to the period in the year late July to early December. Thus the painting. The bear is the sign of the Big Dipper, although physically it apparently doesn't make much sense compared to the appearance of a bear today. However, all of that could have been planned anytime after 24,000 BC, and theirs just may have been different. For example, having a longer tail in periods leading up to today than the shorter tails most bears have today. Very few images in the sky have names that you could basically say, that's where it's got it. Yet that's where it's got its name, because they don't look like what the name would suggest. The only ones that do seem to be the Big Dipper, Small Dipper, and you have to remember that in the code an A and an E are interchangeable. So the name Ursa really stands for ruse. A ruse is a plan, a trick being pulled on people, and since it is connected to the Media and Medi being the original name of the country where Media was born, the capital name Alim. We know that there is a place on earth which is made up of two words called Je, which means I in French, and ruse, which is ruse or rus, and then Alim. So the trick that is being played on us, led by the media in support of their masters, is about to take its planned course, and Syrian immigration is the key. Since most Caucasians are of Syrian Middle Eastern descent, we have lived out our usefulness. So all of this is intertwined in the same manner of the intertwining of our gene structure. The word is entangled. Quantum enchantment basically means that we have two parts to human beings. One part is for the creation of a walking person that can be socially and genetically engineered based on a genetically engineered program they had to use to bring them to life. Whereas the other part is what one would call in their world a spirit. The use of the word spirit in the same context as alcohol and drugs or spirits. They make you act in a way different than you would choose to act. In a human being, the way you act is not visible outwardly, that changes have been made in them. Therefore, they look like you and me but have a different role to play, the bureaucrats do. This requires that some become hypocrites while others become control freaks and a third becomes criminal. Much of it is invisible to those people looking on. The change in them is not apparent by how they speak, act, walk, in manners. Say that Scotch, gin, beer, or wine changes a person, but that change remains visible in the eyes of onlookers. It's very difficult to spot a control freak, a hypocrite, or a crook. 500,000 were killed on the spot in Syria by cannon fire. Imagine Barack Obama ordering the military to go bomb Dallas or Detroit. I've been dealing with it since 1986, the minute I said, what the hell is going on in the world? They've been harassing and covering up by hanging up the phone ever since I first said what is really going on in the world. Why do these things appear to be untrue? After all, they taught them to me in school. 12 tribes were fabricated with the help of Egyptians in a place that uses Media's name, Alim. There is the history of the world and the development of human thinking written as a logo by the Royal Bank of Canada. They have on their logo a set of 3 letters, RBC. Then there's a picture of a big cat, which is the model of a panther. Now the story is that number 2 is number 1, just like seconds are the first thing spoken about in time on a clock. Seconds, because the first is a secret. If you imagine that there's a cave, and in that cave number 2 appears to be number 1, and that's a rat. What's happened to number 1? Before a rat there was an ant, and all the ants gather up all of the information and take it underground. Just like the Moho discontinuity provides place for the first males and females who started gathering information, and they ended up taking it underground, like Neanderthals and Amazonians. So the ants are the representatives of number 1. They gather and hide. That's like monasteries gather information and hide. Then you have the rats. The rats are the original explorers. They go everywhere, just like the Portuguese. The Portuguese were the sailors who went to South America, China, India, and in Antarctica. Portuguese means that if you divide the word into its component parts, the door to the geese. A goose is Canada, the gateway to the north. Then there's some places they can't go in a cave because there's a river that's too wide or a lake that's too wide and deep that they can't get across. So they grew wings and they became the RBC. Rats become bats, and what do bats do? Bats hit a ball past the defense set up to prevent them running and over the fence a homer run. Why is it that as soon as people go to the university they are taught Greek? Because the two most famous books of Homer describe the past and the present. They get over the obstacles, while in the old days the obstacles were the oceans. By putting up sails on ships they got to travel where the rats could not go until they could get a ride on a boat. Then once the cave has been explored, you need a version of the animal that goes outside and comes back in, and that's a cat. The cat spends its nights outside and its days sleeping inside the safety provided by the cave. The biggest cats are tigers, lions, panthers, black panthers, mountain lions. So they gather up their food and they bring it back into the cave to eat, just like bears carry their winter season in a deep sleep in the safety of a cave. When you're looking at a big cat and a bear, which one looks more like Longtail? Although they were cats and they were going into caves, people could have mistaken them for bears, and that may be how the Big Dipper got its name as a bear. A bear with a long tail would have been a mountain lion, a panther, her in pants. Now the question is, if you have a world with ants, rats, bats, and cats, and mountain lions, and no human beings, how does a human being survive? First of all, how does it get made? We know that the periodic table of elements that make up all chemistry can be found all over the world in different quantities. That material came from outer space, and as asteroids hit the Earth, they deposited some of these elements. Everything that's alive is a combination of these elements, a different recipe. So what happens? Every now and then, through a basic rule of time, the right combination of elements gathers together in the right place under the right circumstances and ends up in water. And out of that, by chance called evolution, the right parts, the right elements come together in the right quantities to create life in the form of a human. Maybe 1 in a million years, maybe 1 million in a billion years, different parts of the world. So at one stage of the game, a human baby is created. The first ones were hermaphroditic, a combo of male and female in one body, but they all died on the shore of whatever puddle of water they came out of, because they no longer were being fed. They all died, that is, until by chance a cat, such as a panther, a tiger, a mountain lion, jaguar, or whatever you want to call them, having given birth and lost its baby for whatever reason did not survive. The cat is going around looking for its baby and comes across a human, picks it up as cats always do and takes it home in order to nurse it. In the cave comes the mountain lion with the baby, and the baby survives long enough feeding off the cat. In fact, cats were the first ones to have interactions with humans and brought them into their homes. That's the story written as Tarzan. An animal takes a child home, feeds it until it's able to take care of itself. If you remember the movies about Tarzan, its protector while it was living with the chimpanzee were the lions. So the history of humanity is written as a secret, A, at the beginning. Ants. The color is tan. The number is 10. So it's a journey from A to 10. 1 to 10, and A being number 1, followed by rats such as bureaucrats, followed by bats such as Homer, home run, education like the Iliad, followed by cats such as the Portuguese leaving home, ending up creating BC, Brazil cat. Where does Brazil cats live? In the Andes, and they take the high road to Peru. The French word for road or street is rue. Pere is father, fat her. A pregnant mother makes duplicates of herself, clones. Until at one time the male clones meets the female clones who can't produce, for whatever reason, an offspring by themselves, but discover that through copulation they can make genders that are no longer clones, no longer attached to the same root, but can wander about on their own, and make choices on their own. They are no longer attached to a tribe, but can intermarry with other tribes, and they can change their genetic makeup. Then one day in the Andes, in the Himalayas, and in the mountains all over the world, avalanches occur, and a number of people are instantly frozen and die. Later, whether it be months, years, centuries, or millennia, these frozen people are discovered by people who just happen to be walking by. If they find the location where thousands of people were covered up in a village at the base of a mountain by an avalanche, they have thousands of samples on which to experiment, bringing them back to life. The first thing would be to melt them. As soon as you melt them, they fade away as any dead person would, so the experiment becomes what process can be used to extract the life force that exists within the entanglement of a genome. Without knowing any of those words, they experiment with the thousands of bodies that they have, which are frozen in an avalanche. Eventually, they start to grasp the concept. You have to do it slowly. You have to do it in a container with a watery substance, and you have to have it in there the mix of fertilizer equal to semen. So they take cauldrons into the caves, fill them up with water, add sap from a tree. In a mountainous area, they would normally be pine trees. The word pine is linked to spine. They do it quickly down to as slow as possible. Then they discover that over a period of time, the existing body disappears, leaving behind the making of a new one, who, much like the firstborn, the elements are present to make a new body. The conditions are right, and out of the cauldron comes a baby. Genetic engineering is made. Now the baby has to be given to a nurturer. Of course, they don't want to admit that they're manufacturing these children. They say they must have been born by normal means, by a parent who couldn't take care of them. So they call them foundling, from the word foundation, knowing full well they were genetically made children, genetically engineered. The children grow into full-size adults. There's one thing they learn about these foundlings. That's the fact that they carry a personality that separates one from the other, and that they can change the personality by changing the sap which they have added into the water in the cauldron. The child was made out of another person. They find that the person's traits has the ability to do some things different from others. Then they start to realize that the trade, if you want to call it that, the approach to work that was the original person who died in the avalanche, can be passed on to the child. The trade, or the work that the original did. However, the personality can be changed by the type of sap used. Most fir trees provide a sap that is pretty nasty in its taste. They go around looking for different trees. Date trees in the Middle East would be one place where they would end up saying the personality of these people extracted from DNA out of a dead person seems to be less cantankerous, the sweeter the sap is. Then they begin a search for sap that has a high level of sugar, because a nice personality is much easier to control than a barbaric personality of the ones made from fir trees. Every sap of every kind of tree is taken into the lab for experiments. The elm tree seems to be one that they settled on. It showed certain weaknesses that could be improved with the sap of an oak tree or a chestnut tree. The sweetest sap of all was discovered in a maple tree. M-A at the beginning of maple, and then A-P for paw, so you have ma and paw. They had tried apple and sent Johnny Appleseed's story to America. Make a lot of apple trees and make sure everybody gets a Bible and they'll follow the rules. Le at the end just means the in French. Apple and maple. What's the difference? The maple has an M, which is the symbol for breasts. One less P. So the apple becomes the maple. The maple tree sap running into water makes it the sweetest tasting water of all water, which is potable. The area of the Great Lakes has the most amount of apple trees, especially Quebec and Ontario, but a lot as well along the shores of the St. Lawrence and Lake Ontario. So now they've discovered how to make children, how to change their personality through genetic engineering prior to birth, serving as amniotic fluid replacement. Then they teach the children using the Bible as the book of rules, all copied and modified from the books of Enoch that first appeared 600 years after Adam and Eve in the book. Of course, some of the books of Enoch are secret because they teach genetic engineering and tell the reason why genetic engineering is preferable to copulation. Everything can be pre-planned for the person who will be made. The planning can serve a program, a purpose long term. Since there is not one thing that needs to be done, they need to make gene pools so that they have multiple approaches to solving one single problem, such as the UN, as opposed to federal governments, all led by bureaucrats. If you're going to make a pool, its purpose is to get from one place to another in the big overall plan. No one personality or multiple personalities can carry the big plan from beginning to end without being spotted. So they have to give a lifespan that is shorter than the time it takes to gain the knowledge of how they really were made. Yet they know that as they tweak the information, eventually some people will be made who will put 2 and 2 together and come up with 5 instead of 4. 5th dimension instead of 4 dimensions. Therefore, when that time occurs, they have to kill them en masse, so they have to have war. You have war in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. They have to have pestilence. You have to have Ebola and now mosquitoes from Brazil, famine in refugee camps, disease, small heads, the 2 heads on a male. Prevent the small head from acting, and no more reproduction will come from that person. Eventually, create the conditions for mass execution, the Louis the Sioux. Of course, they need a calendar of events to tell those in the know where they're at. One event which is about to occur is the separation of the stars that make up the Big Dipper. Most of the stars, 7 of which are clearer than others, are parts of constellations rather than single stars. While one is a dual star, they have together by the same chance that human beings come together, although they are all separate, such as elements are on Earth. 6 of the stars you see are part and parcel of constellations that move in the same direction, while 2 stars are separate and are about to move out of the major center of activity that forms the Big Dipper, therefore creating a hole in the base of the Big Dipper from which a leak begins to appear as a pinhole, invisible to most people, but as with any leak over time will expand the hole and all of a sudden will create a flood. Something has to generate the power of a wave, such as you find being talked about these days. Gravitational waves out in space when 2 black holes come together and merge, and the shock wave made even pushes back gravity. Here we have a situation where the shock made will push back water from Lake of the Woods so that it will merge with Lake Superior, whose northern peninsula, Michigan, holds back the waters, but a leak has begun. As the water from Lake of the Woods enters Lake Superior, an explosion by Superior propane at the western end in the bottom of the bay called Thunder Bay will create a hole in the bottom of the bay, but also simultaneously in the roof of caves that have been mined for thousands of years. The water would tumble into the caves and fill it up until there is no more space, and it bounces out, creating what is known as an inland tsunami, which travels at 400 to 500 miles an hour, the speed of a jet airplane, along the bottom of Lake Superior, 1,200 foot under the surface, until it hits the Michigan Peninsula, where the leak has become a torrent and knocks the entire peninsula over at a height of at least 40 feet, but could be even much deeper. All of the water from Lake of the Woods, which now allows coming from the western sources to go straight through the Lake Superior rather than turn down the Missouri or Mississippi rivers, is added to that of the Great Lakes. It overwhelms Lake Michigan and Michigan's southern peninsula. It overwhelms Georgian Bay as it goes down the areas at Sault Ste. Marie that has the locks and dumped into Gore Bay. Goes on land on the other side in a place called Midland and heads for Orillia and Barrie at Lake Simcoe. Orillia is where the Ontario Provincial Police have set up their headquarters, addressed 777. On the southern side, it floods Chicago off of Lake Michigan, and everybody runs south, not knowing what a whole canal structure from a place called Ottawa, not the capital of Canada, but a city in Illinois, carries water to the Chicago diversion at the southern end of Chicago, where water normally now flows to the Mississippi at St. Louis. So as they run away from one flood, they're running towards another flood. Getting caught in between takes out millions of people. Same happens to Detroit. Same thing happens to Cleveland, Toledo, and Ohio. As the water runs on land in both Canada and the United States, it takes out major population centers. in Toronto, Hamilton, London, Kitchener, Waterloo, moving down to the Trent Canal system from Lake Simcoe down to Peterborough and out around Trenton. Just before Kingston, the water runs into Lake Ontario. On the south side, it overwhelms the land. It falls from what is Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. It overwhelms Lake Erie and falls over Niagara Falls into Lake Ontario, where there's already a surplus amount of water that fills the gap opening to the St. Lawrence Seaway. The water has no choice but to turn down on land to Fort Drum. Waterton, until it gets around the area of the St. Lawrence Seaway and runs on land behind Ogdensburg, leaving Ogdensburg as a kind of island off the coast of the Seaway, which is jam-packed with water, then turns back down to Messina before it can re-enter the St. Lawrence at the end of the Seaway. Floods Montreal to the level of Pine Street, the main street below Pine Street, since Montreal is an island with a mountain on it called Mount Royal. The lowest part of the mountain is called Pine Street. Just before you get to Pine Street, it's called Sherbrooke. A brook is also water. That means the entire lower part of Montreal Island, which includes residential areas surrounding the financial and business hub of Montreal, is covered in water. Dorchester Boulevard, St. James Street is the financial district below. Beaver Hall Hill is the street that runs up the mountain from the lower parts of the financial district, suggesting dams and water and ponds. Bell Canada has their head office at 1051 Beaver Hall Hill. They have used the site that used to belong to me in Gatineau called Quebec, stealing it from me by a conspiracy with Brian Mulroney's prime ministerial office. Bribes were paid to my two partners to turn over the land that we had assembled for the creation of my infrastructure concept, MyCot. My concept intelligent building, $145 to $165 million project. By handing the land over to Bell Canada, my assets were diminished by $21 million. Potential assets dependent upon the opening of that MyCot project that I had assembled the land for. Water flows up the Ottawa River, and the place the project was to be built is Gatineau. Gatineau is water in French. Gate in water. It is the home of all of the archives of Bell Canada. It is to be part of creation's revenge on the people who planned the destruction of Canada. Is that all of them, border guards and police, will be the first to die in their own attempted mass suicide, mass murder, gene pool destruction. A genocide inflicted upon Canada. And that's it.